had continuous bleeding for like 12 years, and she touches the hem of Jesus' garment and she is healed. So those are the four, miraculous events that happened. The first one, if someone would read Mark 4:35 through 39, through 41.
On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling, but he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear, and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
I thought about that story this morning. I was telling Arthur's a sailor. Arthur had sailboats for how many years, Arthur? A long time? Long time. April the 25th in 2015, Linda and I went over. It was a beautiful morning. We drove over to Dauphin Island, and she had an art show that day at the little St. Francis Episcopal Church. And around 3 o'clock that day, a fellow came through our booth, and he showed us his phone, and it was solid red to our west. He said, "Y'all, there's some bad weather coming." So we talked to the lady in charge, and she said, "Yeah, y'all can go ahead and break down if you want to," and we did. And we had gotten everything loaded by the time the storm hit. That same day was the Dauphin Island Regatta, which left out of the host club that day was the Fairhope Yacht Club. And through a series of kind of mistakes, it got off a little late, and that storm hit, and it ended up with 73-mile-an-hour winds. There was over, 6 people died, and it was just a horrible experience. There were 40-something, boats that had to be rescued, and Linda and I fortunately gotten everything loaded up, but we had not. We had a friend, Linda had a friend, her husband had to work that day, so we were helping her. She wasn't, and that storm hit, and it was bad. And we'd gotten everything in her little PT Cruiser except her tent, and the weights were off, and I'm holding on to this tent, and I thought I was gonna be a box kite. I mean, the wind was that strong. I tell this story, if anybody ought to understand something about a storm, it ought to people that live where we live. With the weather that we get here. The Sea of Galilee is approximately 13 miles long and 7 miles wide. It's about 1/3 the size of Mobile Bay. But when they get a wind and a storm on a body of water like that, it can be, really ferocious. And that's what happened here. And, the thought of God created a orderly world, but occasionally chaos happens. And Arthur, would you describe a storm or squall like that as chaotic?
I'll do a lot worse than that. These people, the ones that managed to get their sails down, were the ones that lived. And even with the bare pole, they were going so fast, all they could do was just hang on to the rudder and pray they could keep the coast straight and not let it turn.
So we can imagine that the disciples are in a similar situation. In 1986, during a drought and around the Sea of Galilee, they discovered on the south end of the lake a boat that dates back. They call it the Jesus boat. There's no evidence that Jesus was ever on it, but it does date back to Jesus' time. And they have been able to recreate. The boat was approximately 27 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. you imagine that size boat, and we've got the 12 disciples and Jesus on the boat, and they're going across the Sea of Galilee. They were frightened, there's no doubt, as we would be. But storms, I think, are an indication of not only physical storms, but also things that happen in our lives. Occasionally, things are not always just calm and smooth. Occasionally, life gets a little chaotic. And I think there are lessons here as far as, Jesus is not going to abandon us. He's there. And so many times our reaction deserves, "Oh, ye of little faith." The sections we go over today in Mark 4 and 5 are mirrored in Luke and chapter 8 of Luke, and in Matthew in chapter 8 and 9. All of these stories are replicated in all three places. There are some minor differences, but basically the same story. That would indicate to me they're pretty important to determine what the lessons we've got from them. Any thoughts on the reaction of the disciples or Jesus' reaction?
Well, I think it was interesting that their fear of the weather quickly changed to fear of the Lord.
Right.
Because they were like, okay, wait a minute. This guy may actually be God. And it was a whole new level of afraid.
Right. What I think the N.T. Wright had a question about that, was what was the fear and why were they afraid? And was the fear and awe, or who is this that?
The wind and the waves obey him.
Yeah, he calmed the sea with just his word. So.
Also, Ron, I think if you go back, these people were not necessarily seafarers. Their recollections of the sea was the demons and everything. So they still had that fear within them of the water. And so, I think it said in the book also that the Phoenicians were more seafaring people and they were used to it. So these people were not, and so they had a different relationship in terms of the mindset of the water and things that could happen in the water. So they had an instilled fear.
Absolutely. Michelle?
Well, I thought, because to them, Jesus just performed a miracle even greater than the ones that they'd already seen. And this miracle wasn't for others, it was for them. So I don't know if that made a difference, because they were like banding with Jesus going out performing these miracles, but now it's something that they felt they couldn't handle. And he handled it for them, so it was an awe moment, because they realized even though we are with him and he's our teacher and we're doing the things that he's telling us to do, there are some things that without him we still can't do.
I think I saw the question. Yes, Richard.
I think that they still didn't recognize Jesus' power or his abilities, because they asked the question, who is this man? And they still didn't recognize who Jesus was.
Yeah, I would think you're right. I think the author, Wright, asked the question, where else do we see a storm in the Bible? Jonah, does Jonah come to mind? Yeah. A little different circumstances, but still, fright and fear. Of the 12 disciples, 4 of them we think were fishermen. I mean, that's what we're told. That, Peter and his brother, and then John and James, they were all from that Capernaum fishing village. But the other 8, we had tax collectors and others of which that, probably were not familiar with the water at all. So.
Don't you think it's different too when I'm looking at something that's occurring to you and it's easy for me to see what you're doing right or wrong or what you're going through, but then when it's my time to go through And these people had been seeing Jesus perform miracles for other people. And it's easy to see that. But when you're in the middle of it, I'm not always looking at Jesus. I'm not looking at those things. It's a completely different emotions that I have now than when I'm looking at it from somebody else's view.
What God has done for somebody else as opposed to what he's going to do for you. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. John, you had a question, comment?
Ask, Ron, what do you make of Jesus being asleep?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, obviously he had no fear of the storm. I mean, he knew how it was going to come out. So in a minute, we'll talk about why were they going across. I mean, it was like it's a single mission. They've got a single mission to do, and it's a weird mission at that. I think. I mean, they're going to go all the way across, this 7 miles, and they're rowing, and it's in a storm, and the purpose of that appears only to be about the encounter with this demon-possessed man, because after the demons are exorcised or gotten out of the man, immediately they turn around and go back across the Sea of Galilee, back to Capernaum. So, this is a single purpose. He didn't know what the purpose was. Jesus said, "Get in the boat. We're going over there." They were obedient to that. I think we need to be, that obedient also. So.
As far as him being asleep, I think, he's been teaching all day, and I know from experience, when you've been teaching all day, you can be so exhausted you will sleep through a storm. I've done it. I haven't known to wake up in the morning and have somebody else in my household say, "Man, that was some wild weather last night," and go, "Well," because I slept right through it.
Yeah, I had, Todd Brown says that he's not sure whether it's James Montgomery Boyce, or, as John now says, that Matthew Henry. One of those are our assistant pastor, because they're always in the bulletin every week. But I looked at Matthew Henry this week. If you don't know anything about Matthew Henry, it's very interesting. He has stood the test of time. He was born in 1662, died in 1714, and he was a son of a nonconformist pastor. And by nonconformist, he lived in England, and his father was not a member of the Church of England. He had actually been evicted. They had to take a certain oath. There were some 2,000, at that point, the church and the state were one in England. And if you were not part of the church, then, you lost a lot of privileges. And so if you look up Matthew Henry, they say he's a nonconformist pastor. Well, he was also Presbyterian, so I think that's why John likes him. But, interesting guy. And when we get to the story about Jairus, the daughter, Matthew Henry lost 4 daughters in childhood or infancy, and he had to have a real heart for that particular story. So, yeah.
I was thinking about Kathy and Pastor John's comment, as far as hers with the perspective and his with the sleeping, because they had been performing miracles, they in essence had, like the whole thing, like when a student becomes a master, so they were out there teaching, and maybe what Jesus knew they needed was a reminder that they still needed to be taught, and that so that kind of change in perspective, and for them to be like, "Oh my goodness, I can't," but also looking at their master who is sleeping, and that was part of the lesson is how much are you willing to rest in me and trust in me, and be reminding, I need to take them out of this boat so they can be completely rock their world, see me completely calm, and be reminded to always be the student.
Yeah, Henry says that they had taught and answered all the questions up till dark, because it says it becomes evening, and so it's dark. I mean, he preached and taught until he was exhausted. Right, he was exhausted. So, any other comments on the? Do we not see storms in our lives that I mean, I think that's the thing that I take away from it is that, you know, they're always something that's, and we know who can calm the storm. So,
If you've been married, you know about storm.
I'm sitting next to my wife, so I won't reply to that.
if you want to stay married, I'm not going to comment on that. Okay. There you go. That's right. Amen. So, all right. Well, let's leave the sea. We've now arrived. I looked up how long does it take to go across the Sea of Galilee, and it said in good weather, you know, it's about a 6-hour row. These boats also had sails, you know, they had a single like sail, so depending on the weather, you know, what the wind was doing, but and we know it was kind of stormy, but they spent, you know, the better part of the night getting across. So now they're across. If someone would, let's transition to the story about the demon. If they would, someone read Mark 5, 1 through 20 for me.
They came to the other side of the sea, the country of the Jews. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately the man out of the tombs with the unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could keep him in chains, for he had often been restrained with the shackles and chains. But the chains he ripped apart, and the shackles he broke into pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted to the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea, and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it the city and in the country. And people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demonic sitting there, clothed in his right mind. The very man who had believed him, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demon and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave where they were, as he was sitting into the boat. The man who had been possessed by the demons begged him that he might go with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and have mercy that he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim the Decapolis, how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate that. There's a lot in there. I mean, an awful lot. When you read the story overall, and you read about he lived among the tombs, among the dead, basically. I mean, this guy was troubled. If we saw somebody today acting like that, what would our reaction be? Drugs, right? Yeah, he's on something, right? Yeah, I mean, and to some degree, when we talk about that, the chains that he had, that they couldn't contain him. I mean, he was hooked, basically. If you could look at that same, we were thinking if he, in today's world, we would say, yeah, he was, those chains are mentally ill, right? Yeah, but we see that Jesus, he recognizes Jesus, the Son of the Most High. The words Matthew Henry said, that words are not fruit. You know, the fact that we recognize Jesus or who he is, but our words do not show that we know him. It's the fruits that, you know, that show that we know him. So, yes, Wayne.
Unclean spirits and swine, is that a coincidence?
I don't think so. There are two places in the New Testament that we talk about swine and pigs, and they both occur in what appear to be Gentile areas. In the prodigal son, he goes to a far-off land, which would indicate he was not, you know, in Israel. So, and then here, the east side of the Sea of Galilee was a area of Gentiles. When Jesus says that to go to Decapolis and to declare what has happened, Decapolis was 10 Greek, Hellenistic towns in that area. And it's kind of interesting. We'll get to the point where he tells Jairus, don't say anything about the resurrection of your child, but he tells Legion, the man called Legion, to go and tell the people what I've done. Why do you think that?
Well, he wasn't in any real danger from the Gentiles. They didn't care.
Right.
It was the Jewish leadership that was out to get him. And I think that's also like a really strong sign this word is for everybody, not just the Jews. And this message is for the Gentiles also. But I think it was just more like, okay, the people here haven't heard of me, they don't know about all this, so go tell them. Because he didn't have to worry about them coming and dragging him off somewhere and putting him in prison or whatever.
Why didn't he want this man to go with him?
Because he wanted him to go tell
Okay, wanted him to go tell. Are we called to go tell?
all the time.
Yeah. Yes, Susan. Excuse me.
Yeah, I saw this thing earlier this week. I haven't had a chance to invest in who this is, but there's this young guy, like 19 or 20, and he goes into some of the darkest places to preach the gospel, and he talks about this, and he went to, I guess there's something called Furry Con, and this is for people who like identify as animals, and he went there, and he was being interviewed on some Christian podcast, and the lady was like, so you just have no fear to go anywhere, why did you go here? And she's kind of smiling and stuff, and he gets real serious. He said, can I tell you something? He said, this is probably one of the darkest places we've ever been. He said, but in the darkest places where people seem so, messed up by the world standards, that's where people are hungriest. Because they are searching for their identity. And it gave me chills. He said, they're searching in pronouns, they're searching in sexuality. He goes, and I can't judge them because before Jesus saved me, I was searching, maybe not in those places, maybe not in those ways. He said that the hungriest places, they're the places that are searching the most. So maybe that's why, he's like, go and tell him he knew that place was hungry and searching.
If Jesus, obviously he knew this man needed help, and they went to some great effort through a storm to get here. If Jesus will do that for this demon-possessed guy, what would he do for you?
Gentile, no less.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, Kathy.
Okay, I want to compare two parables, and I don't know the other parable. We talked about it. What's the difference between now, him telling this man to go out and tell the others, and in the other parable, I know somebody in this room has to know where it is. He was told not to go tell anybody. Y'all know?
He said it's not that,
Because this man wasn't going to Israel. The Decapolis had no conception of the Messiah, right? A preconception of the Messiah, like the Israelites did. So Jesus says, you can't come with me, but sure, you go back home over there, and you can tell them, because they don't have an idea of what a Messiah is. So that he couldn't be misunderstood, in other words.
So that goes back to what Jackie said, that in the first one, he was going back to the Jews.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is we'll get into Acts, and super fun.
Thank you.
One of my commentaries on it said this was the first profession to the Gentiles.
The first, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I heard you say this week, or last week, sometime this, Oliver, that it's a matter of his time not being there yet. So, it wasn't time to tell. And there was fear, I mean, not fear, but there was danger from the Jews. And they were looking, I read, the Jews thought of Messiah several different ways. One way was a conqueror that's going to, kick Rome out. And another way, I think, was the second David I read or something, that there's so, I mean, they obviously did not see a suffering Messiah. I mean, that they had no conception of that. Not only did the Jews not have it, those 12 that were with him didn't have, they didn't understand either, so.
Will you help my brain? Have they received their charge yet to go to the ends of the earth and tell the news of the gospel?
Not yet.
But then this is like a foreshadowing of that, right?
Yeah.
So that it can be like literally, that's what this kid talked about too. He said ultimately what everybody is searching for is their identity. That's what we're searching for. And he's like, and you wouldn't believe how receptive all these people are because you offer them a hope of a true identity. It's going to be like some foreshadowing of going to the ends of the earth and what that looks like, into the dark places, not just the happy-go-lucky, we like to talk about.
Yeah, they have not been charged yet, but I am taking a little bit because someone was talking about that Mark comes across, I mean, he hits you hard quick. I mean, this is chapter 4, and if you look at Matthew, I said the comparable, that's chapter 8 and 9 in, the other Gospels. So, I mean, Mark's packed a lot into the first 4 chapters, and there are only 16 chapters. So, yes, Todd.
Maybe the 7-mile trip across the sea was going through the storm and all of that was maybe the whole purpose was that Jesus could send out the first missionary.
Yeah.
Which seems a lot more than just saving one person.
And in our Sunday school class, if we were going to create the first missionary to go out, would he be a demon-possessed person that had been cutting himself? And that's not who we would have designed. No, it's like I've said before, if I wrote the Bible, I wouldn't have written it this way. I'd have taken all the, stuff. Yeah. It would be a perfect story, just like my family, right? You're wrong. Okay. Easy. Somebody's really laughing in the back. I did not agree with Richard Lunda, so that's right. All right. Any other thoughts? That's some great thoughts. So I had not thought about the first missionary and that the churches were there in Acts. That's a great pickup. So good. That's why we have the Council of Many. So I know when I came up today, Glenn Sikora's got security today. He said, "You teaching?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Good day to have security." So I hope he was teasing, but
Hey, Ron,
yeah.
who would be the most believable person to that community? Like, I was just whispering to Todd, I'm like thinking, I can't stop thinking about this whole, furry kind and how heartbreaking that is. But, if you were to have somebody who, identified as a raccoon and dressed like that or whatever, and then all of a sudden, they're changed by the gospel and they go back to their community and they teach them about that. Aren't they going to be more received than somebody who's up here like, God's a dictator, you better do A, B, and C, or he's how
Yeah.
beautiful it is that God knows how missionaries are supposed to work, how change works, and how it is going to be received the most genuinely because it's the most authentic.
We see, as y'all pointed out, the first missionary, the churches. We also see the first rejection, or maybe not the first rejection, but a rejection, because all the other people said, "Leave, get out of here. You've upset our world." 2,000, pigs gone. Not only the meat, but they made shoes and a lot of bacon, right? Yeah. But it's a couple of things. One gospel uses Gardines, and one uses the other G word, Gerasenes. And they were both areas. I read one place that said it'd be like, you could say, you know, I'm from New York. Well, is that New York City or is that New York State? I mean, so you get, there's a mistake in the Bible because it says here and then, it says something here, but that's not the case. So,
Hey, also, Ron, who would be more convicted and more convincing than a person that it actually happened to?
right.
You know, you can speak from experience, or you can speak from your mind. Who's more convincing? The one that's been through.
Yeah, if you've ever heard a testimony of somebody that was alcoholic or hooked on drugs or something and found Jesus, it's pretty convincing. I mean, you know, they've been there, they've been in the trenches, and, you know, they've seen the, you know, Christ's redemptive work, you know, firsthand. So you're right, it's a great point. So, and the fact that John pointed out that Paul found churches in that area, you know, was a surprise. They started someplace. So, yeah. What, you know, any comment about, you know, whether somebody said something about the pigs, you know, I've looked up why are pigs unclean or why were they considered unclean, and you know, pig, pretty nasty animal. I mean, they mire in the mud. They'll eat anything. They said, I mean, they'll eat corpses. They'll eat, you know, the dung. I mean, you know, they really are nasty kind of creatures. The ones that you're eating your bacon from, you know, they're pen fed or whatever. So I'm not trying to get you to, you know, swear off on bacon, but anyway, they are in fact unclean, and you know, the technical word is the division of the hoof. They meet that to be clean, but they don't chew the cud. So, you know, from a Old Testament standpoint, that was the reason they were not clean. But you can just see, you know, the spirits, 2,000 pigs going down the bank. I saw a picture of the east side of Sea of Galilee, and it's quite a steep kind of bank that goes down. You can just see them just going down that hill. And somebody asked, you know, how much was a legion? Why was his name Legion? And because there were many of them. He wasn't just possessed by one. There were many of them. And a legion, a Roman legion at that time was approximately 6,000. But Henry said that it might change, you know, like a regiment at his time could be several different numbers. And so a legion could have, you know, we know that at least there were 2,000.
Say it was a couple thousand.
Yep. So, any other comments about this before we go on? Okay. All right. If I could, we're going to go to Jairus' daughter and the lady with the bleeding issue. If someone would read Mark 5:21 through 34.
When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him. "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed in around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that the power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some men came out Some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter's dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but why do you think he told them not to tell anybody about this event?
Back in Jewish territory now.
Yeah, back in Jewish. Henry says that the emphasis should be on on Christ's resurrection, not on this resurrection, if you would. I mean, Christ raises Lazarus. He raises Jairus' daughter. But the real emphasis should be on Jesus' resurrection. So, because of what that represented. So, any questions before we end up?
Ron, this maybe, I don't know how many people in here, y'all know we're big fans of the show The Chosen, but one of the things I love about it is kind of like what Kathy talked about, perspective. So much of it is we read and we think in our minds like a history story or whatever, and so many of these they touched on, and the one was the lead with the bleeding and the girl dying. And what I thought was so cool about it is it kind of just really takes you back to the humanity and imagine it. And so what they showed was this girl, like, you know, going to these doctors or whatever, giving all her money and then kind of brushing off, but also showed like her going every day, twice a day to clean her clothes, like everybody going away from her and chastising her and throwing things at her. You know, there's so much we don't know, but we know that it happened. And so if you think of 12 years ago from now, you get back to 2012, right? From there until now, just being isolated as a human being, being an outcast, not being welcome anywhere, your friends would probably shun, you know, I think just like really thinking about, and then it's not about focusing on her, like all of that, and just one touch. Just
Yeah.
one touch.
Yeah. And Henry also pointed out that, you know, we don't know what the bleeding was, but I mean, it could have been personal in nature and just a touch, you know. She didn't have to approach. Anybody else? Any other? Oliver, would you close this?
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you so much for bringing us to church today to hear Ron and to share the word, your word, Lord. We ask you to put it in our heart and guide us. Lord, we know as into light, put in this chapter fear and faith.